Good evening, everybody. I'm here to discuss breathing, and the title for tonight, in case you weren't seeing it ahead of time, was state shifting with breath, utilizing the breath to shift your state. And we'll do a little bit of an overview eventually as to what that means, why we might do it, and how that is done. There's a variety of different ways that can transpire. And the way that I like to function whenever I'm communicating or sharing about anything is to really provide a lot of experience with it. So, I will talk a little bit tonight, but a lot of it will be turned around to you to actually have a taste of it in a number of different ways. And then, speak to a bit of it, have another taste of it, and then do some Q&A. You can address questions, or I can address your questions around the particular techniques, if that's what's up for you, or anything else around the breathing practices. The breathing practices themselves have been a big part of my own history, starting with martial arts, through the training of martial arts, and predominantly for myself in Chinese traditions, both internal and external styles of martial arts. There was a lot of breathing practices to harness energy and to focus the mind. And that led me into Buddhist styles of meditation and into yoga practice. And yoga practices are littered with breathing practices. It's a major piece of what they do, and or what has been cultivated in that practice or that tradition. And then over time, as I continue to work with people and saw that through these practices and sharing yoga and working with a lot of bodies, getting into the somatics of things, seeing how much of the psychomotion material was actually structured in the tissues of the body and in the breathing patterns, that led me into additional styles of breathing practices that would help liberate some of that and clarify it and potentially help resolve layers of trauma even. And I was kind of a truth seeker in the midst of that, so I also studied the particular styles of breath work that would also help kind of shift us past experiences of relativity into deeper layers of consciousness, and more as an exploratory tool in seeking truth. So we'll get a little taste of some of that tonight. First thing I'm going to have you do, actually, if you have notepads and things, is just feel free to, when you're ready, to set those aside. And I know each of these gatherings, there's usually a few minutes of an opening meditation. I'll guide you through one now. It might be more than 5 minutes. I'd like to kind of front load some of the practices here so that you can get a taste of it. Then we'll talk about it for a bit and then continue with some practices afterwards. So many of you have already adjusted your position. If you haven't done so yet, just make sure that you're extra comfortable. And if you're open to it, you could close your eyes, maybe halfway, maybe all the way, or you might simply cast your gaze downward in the spirit of becoming a little bit more drawn into your own personal experience. The opportunity to become self-reflective. And over the next few breaths, excuse me, without manipulating the breath as best as possible, simply spend that time softening your body, breath by breath. A little bit of extra relaxation in your feet. And your legs. Softening all around your pelvis and your hips, as if you could let your pelvis sink even more deeply, not only into the chair that you're on, but into the support of the floor, the structure of this building, and the layers of the earth below us. Relaxing your belly and your chest. And all along your back. Relaxing the muscles of your back so that you may become even a little bit more present to the movement of your breath in your torso and along your spine. The muscles involved in breathing have an impact on your spinal movement and in the movement around your abdomen and your chest. So you may literally feel at times as you breathe in and breathe out a little bit of expansion or contraction in the torso. You might feel a little bit of an arching or flexing of the spine subtly. You may feel a rising and falling in your chest and shoulders. And when you're softening to a certain threshold within your system, especially down through the pelvis, you might even feel the pulse of your breath in your pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm, layers of muscles in that territory that, when surrendered enough, will actually move and support the breath as well. Amidst all that, softening across your shoulders and down your arms to your fingers. And relaxing across your shoulders and up your neck, your jaw. Relaxing your face. All around your skull. Even more internally, softening the tongue in your mouth, the eyes and the eye sockets. And even your inner ears, relaxing a little bit more. Now from here, just notice your current state. When I'm working therapeutically with people, finding our state from time to time gives us moments of checking in, and it also creates a baseline. It's like, where am I at now? So that when I apply a practice, I can more accurately assess the response to that practice. Which supports us in learning from it. Gathering the benefits from it. So notice how your body feels, notice the state of your mind. Notice if your breathing is, maybe in the time sense, short little bursts, or drawn out longer. If there's frequent pauses. The sound of it, if it's really quiet, or if it's generating some kind of sound in some section of your body. Noticing if your breath is located in a particular region of your body, your chest, your belly, your throat, your head. And then from here, take one of your hands to your belly if you haven't done so already. And for a few moments, just tune into the feeling of your hand against your belly. And notice if your hand can feel any of the movements of your breath. Your breathing, literal physical sense doesn't go down, or your lungs don't descend down into your belly, but when the diaphragm, the main breathing muscle that's transverse through the body, about the base of your rib cage, when you're breathing in, it's going to create a pressure wave that may distend your belly a bit. May create a sensation as if you're breathing into your belly. Some of you may be opposite to that. Some of you may feel that your belly presses out into your hand a little bit when you exhale. Some of us have a more of a paradoxical style of breathing where that happens. So from this place of awareness, let's see what happens in your system when, for the next maybe 2 or 3 minutes, you consciously choose to breathe just a little bit more deeply into your body so that your belly expands gently into your hand on the inhales, and your belly on the exhales releases slightly back towards your spine, away from your hand. Each inhale, your belly expands very softly, gently into your hand. And each exhale, your belly draws back just a little bit towards your spine, away from your hand. going to continue doing this for about 2 more minutes. And the mind may wander to other things, different places, different times, different types of experiences. And when you notice that happening, if you choose to, you can bring it back to this gentle pulse of your breath that fills your belly on the inhales and releases your belly on the exhales. The last minute or so here as you keep breathing like this, so you can continue to soften the muscles of your torso and along your spine so that your whole body gets to be involved in the breathing. Last couple breaths like this. And notice, what did that do for you? If you haven't done so already, you can rest your hand that was on your belly. What did that do for you? Just noticing any changes to your sensations, to the state of your mind. Sometimes referred to as abdominal or belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. Noticing again shifts in sensations, feelings, emotional energy, mental fluctuations, thinking. And also even the quality of your breath as it shifted from where it was at when we started. That particular practice was one that's based on breathing into a particular region of the body to shift the state of your nervous system. Now we'll shift to a different type of practice where we're actually counting the breath. So for the next few breaths, as you inhale, just in your mind, a mental count, but have you count to 4, nice and slow. Inhaling 2, 3, 4, and then exhaling 2, 3, 4. Inhaling for a count of 4. And then exhaling for a count of 4. As you inhale for the count of 4, right at the top of the inhale, you may find that the breath stalls for a moment or two. If that happens naturally, just let that happen. And then when the breath starts to fall out, exhale for a count of 4. And there may be a little bit of a stall in the breath, a drift in the breath at the bottom for a moment or two before the inhale wants to come. And the inhale comes in again for a count of 4. In yogic traditions, this is known as samavriti, the equal fluctuations or vacillations of the breath, which is said to have a connection with the vacillations or fluctuations in the mind. That an unsteady mind will tend to have an unsteady breath associated with it, and vice versa. So see if you can stay with that even rhythm of your breath for a little while longer. And if it's really comfortable for you, really easy for you to do the 4 seconds in and out, then you might extend it to 5 or even 6 seconds. Only if that doesn't cause you stress to do so. As you keep going, just for a few more breaths, see if you can soften the breath. And sometimes I'll use the image of a lake that has a lot of wind over top. You might see a lot of ripples in the lake, and it kind of stirs so that you don't have much of a reflection in it. The texture of your breath, if you imagine it like the winds, if you soften it a lot and really steady it so that from beginning to middle to end of the inhale, it feels like a gentle, gentle breeze. And on each exhale, a gentle, gentle, steady breeze. And that even movement of the breath starts to still the waters in the mind. And the ripples die down and becomes more like a mirror-like reflection in the waters that's also transparent. You can see through it. 3 more breaths like this, slow and steady inhales and exhales, same length. And after your last one, let your natural breath resume. Easy natural breath, and notice again what shifted or changed for you, if anything. Notice any shifts in body sensation, feelings, emotional energies, mental states. Changes in the quality of your breath. Once you get a sense of where you're at the moment, then bring a little bit of movement into your fingers and toes in your body, and you might look around the space for a few moments and orient to the room, with each other. After these practices, simply orienting to the room itself, the walls, the fixtures, entrances, other people in the room. It's a way of grounding back into the space, using your senses. It stabilizes the system, especially if you start to feel like you're kind of lifting up and out or shifting in states of consciousness. Going to feel just a couple responses to that, and I just want you to know up front that when we're doing practices like that, even though the intention of the practice might be to support well-being and to optimize our sense of relaxation or the steadiness in our minds, right? Whether it's preparation for meditation or just optimization of our daily lives, the practices can have all kinds of different effects. Some of you might have found that your mind got more restless in trying to do something like that, right? Or that there was some kind of resistance coming up, or sleepiness, or all kinds of different things can transpire for various reasons. And some of you may have noticed kind of the exact opposite of that. It might be energizing or enlivening in some way, or pacifying. So I'm curious for a couple of responses. Just how did you find those first couple breathing practices? What did you notice?
I find it very, I got sleepy, but when we did the numbers, I got really hot. I was really surprised how many differences there are, but mostly sleepy and not
Sleepy.
relaxed.
And then some heat, and then relaxed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I kind of noticed that as opposed to when I normally meditate, this I was using the breath as a way to focus my attention. And this time I was focused on breathing.
Right.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I just use that as an anchor. In fact, that's part of the wording that I use as a breath anchors your mind and as an anchor so that you can go within. And I felt that for some reason you're always sitting at the breath, you're kind of thinking about the breath rather than going into like an empty space.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I find when I do a lot of my meditations. It's like an empty space. And I just enjoy that relief, I guess, or that I was always thinking about breathing.
Yeah, I was giving you lots of stuff to do with your breath. So, yeah. I'll speak to that for sure, because that's what you're describing is very much part of or a style of breathing practice, and for particular purposes. It's a different purpose than what we were doing there with those two techniques.
Because I found that the idea of breathing is out of my mind, out of my head, my thoughts, but in that way, but I guess maybe because I was always listening, I wasn't out of my head, I was in my head.
Yeah.
That's the difference I found.
Yeah, thank you.
Trevor, could you, just because of the audio, could you just sort of summarize what he said so that we'll know, we'll get picked up on the audio from you?
Yeah, what one of the participants just spoke to was essentially that, if I could paraphrase, that focusing on a particular breathing technique in the sense of a location in the breath or the length of the breathing itself seemed to keep him in his head as opposed to out of his head, compared to, let's say, a mindfulness use of breath where we're not actually manipulating or controlling the length of the breath, you're just using it to anchor your attention, your presence on that, yeah, and falling more into an empty space with that, right, or a field of presence as opposed to doing something with the breath. Is that correct? Yeah, which we'll definitely come back to and speak to, because there, again, are different purposes for each of those styles of breathing. Yeah. What else? One other share and what transpired for you? If you noticed any state shift from it? Yeah.
Walter. Walter's the name that I give my depression, so that I can get some distance between me and Walter. Well,
I can't hear you? I can't hear you very well.
that's it.
I thought maybe.
My depression is always present, always having something to say. And while I was belly breathing and moving my diaphragm down and trying to feel just a little bit of pressure against my spine as I was exhaling, the monologue might have been running, but I wasn't listening for a while. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for participating in that. So the topic for tonight, state shifting with breath, ties into some of the shares that were already provided around the experiences that you had with the breath. It's this idea that we can work with the breath to alter our state in some way. And I would say that there are two fundamental alterations, if we're going to break it down into really basic categories, that we're looking at here. And one would be an alteration of your relative experience. In a sense, it's the horizontal domain. It's the things of life. It's in the temperature of the room. If the temperature of the room was cool, you could turn up the thermostat, or you could light a fire in some way and warm the room up. It's not a shift in a state of consciousness per se. You're actually just changing the content, right? So there are a whole realm or field of breathing practices that are here to essentially change the content. So if my nervous system is really dysregulated, if something's feeling a little bit off in my chemistry, breathing in particular ways can actually adjust the temperature in your body. It can actually adjust the volume or temperature in your mind, so to speak, right? All the internal content. If some of you are sitting down to meditate and jumping straight to being a witness to your experience, you may find that stress and the various parts of you that are speaking very loudly in your system are really captivating you, right? They're drawing your attention and keeping you stuck on the things of life, or the the distress around what's going on in your body or in your relationships. And doing practices like these can change the content of it to the point where things calm down enough and are regulated enough that then we can enter more substantially into the meditative practices or shift into altered states of consciousness. So the other domain, which could be seen more as the vertical in it and the depth side of the experience, is you can, with a variety of different breathing practices, shift your state of consciousness. And some basic ways, well, let me say it this way. If you've ever done any psychedelic medicines or have experienced psychedelic or spiritual states in other ways, certain breathing practices can take you into that domain, which arguably is just another state of change in relativity, except it's not, it's of a different order of relativity. Another version of state change that way would be shifting into witness consciousness, simply perceiving, bearing witness to what's transpiring. Mindfulness practice, working with the breath, is much more tailored towards that, right? Which is just another state change. It's a higher order of relativity. It's essentially shifting one into a witness state of consciousness. It's witnessing something or everything, right? But there's still a sense of self and other in that sense. And then potentially you could flirt with thresholds where you're actually shifting beyond that sense of relativity, and breath can be a catalyst for that at times as well. So to summarize that really quickly, a couple very broad categories of breathing practices would be, one is shifting your relative experience, and the other is shifting you in the experience. And you being the center of it and the witness of it to varying degrees. Yeah. Within the category of breathing practices that shift the relative experience, even then there's a couple other subcategories within that domain. One would be, there's a lot of practices in this particular subcategory, it'd be styles of practices that are essentially managing your experience. So it's equivalent to, oh, the room's cold, I'm going to heat it up a bit. So there are breathing practices that will literally support you if you're needing it at that point in time in grounding or centering in your system. Meditations that'll help slow things down and relax your body or calm the state of your mind. They have a very specific purpose when they're applied at the right time. If they're not applied at the right time, you might find that they actually aggravate you, right? Because they could, it's like if the room's already hot and you're thinking that the only thing you can do, the only tool you have is to turn up the temperature, then you're actually going to make the situation worse, right? So picking the wrong breath tool at the wrong time, so to speak, could actually aggravate what you're feeling. So there are tools within breathing to do that, and they typically involve breathing into particular locations within your body. So like earlier with the diaphragmatic breathing, I had the feeling or the sense that you're breathing deep enough into your body that your belly was actually moving with your breath. There's a direct connection from your diaphragm through to the parasympathetic nervous system that essentially activates it when you're breathing with your diaphragm. If you're not breathing effectively with your diaphragm, if it's more like upper chest breathing, that innervation isn't happening as much. You'll find that your sympathetic system is more dominant, right? Your parasympathetic, or the brake in the system, isn't slowing you down. So you might find yourself a little bit more agitated or irritated in ways in your system, a little bit more stressed.
Just to review, what is the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic? I just forgot that.
Yeah, so your sympathetic system is essentially going to be your doer in the system that when it's working constructively, it's you supporting you in creation and activity and play and working, right? Sex, all the things that require energy and doing. Your parasympathetic is going to be your slow down, your rest and digest. So it's going to be the brake to that system that helps you pause.
You know, from biological terms, how does that differentiate when we talk about the body?
How does it differentiate?
When we talk about the body, it's sympathetic and parasympathetic. What are we talking about?
Basically,
You sort of explained it, but I missed it. Because I was thinking of the body as having these two systems.
yeah, but those two.
One you said was the doer, and the other one was.
In this sense, I'm going to say it's more of the brake to the doer. It's going to slow things down. So,
Or sort of like a moderator?
or a moderator, sure. Yeah, and they essentially happen at the same time. So it's not like one turns off and then the other turns on. It's like you've got the doer that's working, and then you have the moderator that's slowing it down or releasing it to do its work. So yeah, kind of a valve in a sense in the system to reduce the flow.
So the sympathetic makes the turkey dinner and the parasympathetic has a snooze after
There
turkey
you go.
dinner? Something like that.
Comatose snooze, reverse snooze, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mentioned breathing into a particular location in your body as being one way of turning that on. Another type of practice would be the timing practice that we did, with 4 in and 4 out, or 5 in, 5 out, 6 in, 6 out. So it's a practice like that, you're essentially trying to make the breath even or rhythmic in its nature. And there have been some measurements done, particularly by the HeartMath Institute. They refer to it as coherent breathing in particular for their practices. And they would say that your breathing rhythms and your heart rhythms need to have a certain amount of coherence or sync to them. And when we're stressed, they start to lose that sync. It's like when you're inhaling, your heart rate should actually rise a little bit. And when you're exhaling, your heart rate should fall a little bit or slow down. And when we're really stressed, we cease to have that. You might end up with a little bit of a state of heightened heart rate or reduced heart rate, depending on the type of stress in the system. That becomes more chronic. Right? We're not seeing as much fluctuation. So breathing with these rhythms in the breath, very specific rhythms, particularly around 5.5 to 6 seconds per breath, brings the breath back into coherence with the rhythms of the heart. And with sustained practice, can actually impact your heart rate variability, which is linked to your breath. And without belaboring the science, and quite honestly, I don't know if I understand all the science to it, like there has been enough evidence or proof that when you start to reestablish your heart rate variability, that actually gives you way more governance over your stress, or way more tolerance for your stress, and resilience towards it. Yeah.
So when you talk about the rhythmic breathing, does that relate to the same sort of length of inhale and exhale? Like, is there something different that happens when you're inhaling for 4 and exhaling for 6? Like, if that's,
Yeah.
is that considered rhythmic as well, or is that something different to have that?
It is considered rhythmic as well. For the HeartMath Institute, they really focused on essentially equal inhales and exhales. But in yogic practices of old, they would actually vary it depending on what's going on in the system. So if you're emphasizing a longer inhale versus exhale, then you might actually be drawing more sympathetic activation into your system and actually bringing in energy. Whereas if you were breathing in for 4 and exhaling for 6 or for 8, you're actually going more parasympathetic and you're slowing things down more. Yeah, so you can actually start to steer the ship a little bit more clearly that way. Yeah. So there's breathing practices that, again, focus on the location of the body you're breathing into. There's breathing practices that are based on time, how long you're inhaling or exhaling for. There are breathing practices that use visualizations, where you might have roots coming out of your body, visualizing roots into the earth and breathing in and out with the earth, or branches into the sky. Those types of breathing practices tend to have a lot of positive effect on our mental and emotional state as well. Sense of grounding or calmness in the system. There are breathing practices that focus on slowing the breath down altogether. There's a particular style of breathing known as Buteyko and other branches of that particular practice where they're essentially trying to get you down to about 3 breaths per minute, which is fairly slow. But that's including a fairly healthy amount of pausing, where you're just kind of naturally lingering in the pauses, the gaps, and then just breathing very slightly, very softly. What's actually been shown to be very much linked to our stress state is a chronic over-breathing in our system, where we're breathing too much, even if we don't know it. Whether it's too much volume or just too rapidly, too frequently. And that actually reduces our CO2 levels, which reduces our capacity to absorb the oxygen that's coming into our system, feeding our tissues, and it can lead to a lot of anxiety and distress within our minds as well. So a practice that's really centered on just slowing the breath down, period, can be really effective in stabilizing CO2 levels and bringing back a sense of safety, essentially, within your body, within your nervous system, your physiology. The key difference between that and doing something like the sum of vritti, or the equal fluctuations of breath, because you could do equal fluctuations of breath that is 3 seconds, or 3 breaths per minute. You could slow down that much. The difference is that with Buteyko, they would say that you don't really, to have the full kind of healing effect in the long term, you don't want to have a managed amount of breath. You just want to naturally slow yourself down to the point where your body's just not needing to breathe that often. Right? So they're really trying to approach it where they're inviting and just pausing in the pausing between breaths until you're really feeling the urges and even a subtle anxiety towards getting breath in, because each of us will probably hit a point where we feel a little bit anxious of like, oh, I need to take a breath. And if you can train yourself to just kind of linger in that space and stretch it out until your body's just naturally, easefully breathing at a very slow pace, it's very commensurate with well-being. It's very much linked to resilience around stress and feeling of just relaxation and softness within the body and mind. So there's slowing the breath down altogether, extending the pauses. And then there's other practices. How many of you have heard of Wim Hof? He tends to be a popular name. Some of you, yeah, some yes, some no's. Referred to as the Iceman. He does cold baths and cold exposure, but then also has a really active style of breathing that he uses. Some say that it comes originally from a practice called Tumo. Some monks in the Himalayas that were originally breathing to support themselves in cold temperatures. They practice that way. The Wim Hof style of breathing, or styles of breathing like this, would actually use a much faster style of breathing to activate the sympathetic nervous system to get things charged up, essentially to apply consciously stress to the body and get energy moving, and then do breath holds where the breath holds actually reduce the volume of breath dramatically at that point in time and essentially reset the carbon dioxide within the system. So it helps the carbon dioxide come back up. It helps you enter a parasympathetic nervous system state, and then you'll cycle back in and do a sympathetic charge again with the faster breathing, and you'll actually typically cycle through that 3 or more times where you're charging the system sympathetically and then purposely going parasympathetic by breath holds or via breath holds. And that alternation between stressing the system consciously and de-stressing the system is said to basically train our systems to regain the capacity to move between stress and not being stressed, stress and not being stressed. Because, saying it another way, when we start to chronically hold stress in our systems, we lose the remembering in our system that we can actually turn it off. We just kind of reside in a buzz, right, where we don't even know how to get out of it anymore. It just seems like our normal state. Right? Yeah.
Would you use like a technique like that if somebody was already in a chronic stress state, so they're already in sympathetic dominance, and you are intentionally then doing this sympathetic parasympathetic, would you still?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Or is
No.
it just almost taking back
Charge of that sympathetic state.
conscious control of it?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if some of you may have experienced this before too, with a tension in your body that's been holding unconsciously. If you actually consciously tense it for a little bit, you're more able to relax it typically. Once you regain some conscious control over it, you kind of willful yes to it, where I'm going to help you do it, I'll do that tension too, and then all of a sudden the body's like, oh, I can find more relaxation on the other side of that. So it's the same idea with the breathing. And the caveat being, when I'm working therapeutically with people, there are people in certain types of stress or certain type, they may be presenting in particular ways where that wouldn't be the right option. Right? It's not one size fits all. Yeah. Yeah. So there's that. There are, what else is there? Sound production. A lot of traditions around the world have toning or chanting, singing. That's another version of breathing practice, really. And it's long toning drawn out chanting is a suspension of the breath. You're taking a breath in and then it's a long exhalation, activates the parasympathetic nervous system in a variety of ways. So most of those practices in one way or another are going to regulate your nervous system and your physiology. They have a calming effect when they're applied appropriately. When we get into, let's say, a mindfulness style practice where you're observing your breath and attending to it, or attending to sensation in the body, either way, there's a couple different effects that are happening there. One thing that would tie into this piece around regulation is that it does tend to train us to focus, to pay attention to something steadily for a while, which tones or activates our frontal lobes in our brain and actually gives us, with practice, more and more capacity to choose what we're paying attention to, more and more capacity to discern and pick between things, right? To make more executive decisions. So arguably when we're experiencing a lot of emotion coming up or experiencing these dysregulated states, that heightened sense of executive capacity within our brain allows us to discern and select within that field rather than being washed out in it. So that, from that perspective, that particular practice could be really good in a regulation sense as well for our system. But then there's a whole nother realm of breath work that also supports our well-being and releasing and working with the stress so that we feel better. And this is a little bit different because where all of those practices were really tailored towards managing your state, like if it's cold, turn the temperature up type situation. There's a style of breathing that you can do where it's like it's cold and maybe I tried to turn the temperature up and it's not working so well, so I'm gonna go and investigate the thermostat or the furnace, or I might call the electrical company. It's like all of a sudden there's like kind of getting into deeper layers as to why the cold might be there. Right? So to say it in our bodies, there's a reason why that stress is there. Right? There might be old attachment wounds from childhood. There might be birth trauma. There might be car accidents. There might be all kinds of different things that are lingering in our background that haven't really been fully digested. Our system got really stressed at some point in time and it forgot to turn that response off. And just trying to turn up the temperature is a temporary fix at times when that lingering stress is there. So there are styles of breathing, such as conscious connected breath work. Some of the common types within that territory are rebirthing and holotropic breathing. Leslie mentioned the pneuma breath work that I do, that's a version of it as well. Where you're breathing in a faster way with very simple instruction to, I'm going to say, build up a lot of energy within the system and kind of captivate your attention to the point where you pass certain thresholds and your body and your mind start to move in very spontaneous fashions. The body can start to release and discharge stress. The mind can start to think in alternate ways or even potentially psychedelic ways, non-ordinary states of consciousness that allow you to see things differently. And as the body moves through those layers of stress, old memories can come up around old traumas and old attachment pieces from childhood and even your birth. And that altered state of consciousness that's evoked amidst breathing like that gives you a chance to experience those things in a new way and potentially bring some resolution or healing to them, with the idea that once they're actually resolved, or layers of those experiences are resolved, then your breathing starts to correct itself without you having to manage it. You don't have to think about breathing for a particular length of time. You don't have to think about where you're breathing into. Your breathing just starts to naturally open up and deepen and become more reflexive and free, because you're healing the underlying stresses that were there, that were causing it in the first place. Yeah.
Is there any risk of, when you do that kind of breathing or rinsing to old material, of sort of getting stuck in that material?
There's a possibility of it being reactivated temporarily. And that's where working with somebody really specifically in that territory, where you might touch into it if parts of it are not coming through really easily and releasing on their own, or with their support, then backing out of that territory and approaching it in a different way for a little while. So you're kind of being really selective about when you're applying that stress to the system and when you're not.
That's where you would come in as a practitioner and sort of guide.
Correct. Yeah, and arguably, if you're practicing it on your own, it's usually even less likely that it's going to come up. The system has a really interesting way of distracting itself if it's starting to approach things that it doesn't really want to see. When there isn't a practitioner there that's maybe applying an extra amount of attention to what's there, if that makes sense. Yeah. But a trained practitioner would support you in riding on that edge, so in a productive way, so that it's not bringing things up too quick or in a way that's disruptive.
Kind of like practitioners who work with psychedelics.
Same idea.
Trained as a person. And that's why.
Yeah.
We need that.
Yeah. And even, I'll try to avoid going down this thread too far here, tangent, but even then, the first incursion into a memory of something old that wasn't really remembered before is usually a really challenging one. And that could happen with a therapist in a therapy office as well, where it's like a memory starts to open up and it's like, oh my God, what do I do with that? And it can feel disturbing in the system for a little while until it's digested and moved through in a good way. Yeah, same kind of idea. Yes, okay. So something else that conscious connected breathwork is good for, and also some other breathing practices, is shifting I mentioned it earlier, it's shifting more into higher orders of relativity, or even potentially flirting with beyond relativity. So again, it's more shifting towards meditation and open awareness, and shifting into witness consciousness, or potentially even beyond witness consciousness, because maybe some of you experienced it, that can actually go away too. That's just another relative experience. So specific types of breathwork can charge the system up to the point where you're entering a field of awareness that is beyond your ordinary sense of consciousness. And we're no longer trying to adjust the temperatures. We're no longer trying to fix a particular problem per se. You're just seeing reality in a very different way. And some basic styles of working with the breath, such as working with the breath in a mindfulness way, or working with the breath. There's a beautiful practice that I really personally appreciate, where you basically just bring your breath to silence. So you're breathing so subtly and so softly that you can't even hear it, and then you attempt to turn your ears to your silent breath to listen to it, which kind of, in some sense, confuses the system, because you're trying to do something that can't be done to audibly hear it. And by doing that, it has an interesting way of kind of slipping you into open space, so to speak, where you're not captivated by things within the relative field. So for those of you that are really curious on the meditation side of things and what's possible and the human potential and beyond, those types of practices can be done within breathwork to support that. Okay. Shall we practice a little bit more before we run out of time here? Okay. Let's just go for like another 5 minutes practice, and then we'll do some Q&A in a few minutes. So let's relax your body. Sinking into your seat once again. Given we just have a couple minutes before we go to some Q&A, I'm going to jump right to that last practice I mentioned, more as a meditative tool. So for the next couple minutes, soften your breath so much that you can't even hear your breath coming and going. For some of you, to clarify, for some of you, even the silent, audibly silent breath may have an internal sound, either in imagination or in some other kind of extra sense. You still might have a sense of sound there. I'm going to ask you to limit your practice to what's audible with your physical ears. So breathing so quietly that you cannot audibly hear your breath. And at the same time, try to listen to your breath, even though you can't hear it. Breathing so quietly you can't even hear your breath. Yet training your ears to the sound of your breath, even though you can't hear it. Listening to that which cannot be heard. Listening to that which cannot be heard. And then for 3 breaths, taking a deeper inhale, and let's make an ah sound on the exhales. Nice long drawn out ah sound together here. Couple more times. Last time, feeling the vibrations in your body as you make that sound, nice, long, drawn out ah. And then 3 breaths where we're going to breathe in halfway, and then pause for a moment and then breathe in more to fill yourself up even more, and then make a sigh on the exhale. We'll do that 3 times through the nose on the inhales. So big breath in, two breaths to get full here. So full or half breath first, another half, and then 2 more times. Okay, and then coming back to the room and moving your body a little bit, and checking out the space. So we have space for a couple questions, if there's.
Comment on that last breath you did, because I've heard reference to that where you take a breath and then finish the inhale, but I don't understand it seems to be sort of
Popular, yeah, sometimes called cyclic or cyclical sighing, and it's proving in studies to be quite effective for discharging and relieving the nervous system as well. Yeah, 3 often seems to be the magic number that's offered for it, but I'm sure you could do numerous more and still gain lots of effect from it. Yeah, the idea is some people will say kind of fill up halfway and then the other half on the second inhale before you do the sigh. Other people will just basically tell you to take a full breath and then top it up a little bit. See if you can take in even more so you're maxing your system out comfortably, and then sighing from there, making the sound. Yeah, there's a number of different reasons why it would relax your system, but it helps. Yeah.
3 breaths per minute. Would that be like a box of 5 or 110 and 10 out?
Yep. Yeah.
Which 5 box or the 10 and 10?
Could be either one. Could be either one. The key part is the 3 breaths per minute. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Again, as we veer more towards the Buteyko style, where you're actually focusing on breathing less, 10 in and 10 out will tend to be quite a substantial breath. So arguably that could still be stressful in the system unless you're really masterful at taking a very thin breath for 10 seconds. If you're really focused on filling yourself up a lot, that could actually be seen as a little bit of a stress on the system. That could also reduce carbon dioxide as a recourse to it. So basically the 5-5-5-5 as a box style breathing would technically be seen as a more passive or more peaceful style of breathing, because you tend to be limiting how much breath you're taking in.
So the 10 isn't meant to fill up right to the lid?
Correct. Your 10's more the timing. It's not meant to be like maxing yourself out. Yeah.
You've given us a wealth of information here. If there is one breathing technique that you would recommend when we're faced with acute stress and anxiety, what would that be?
Honestly, if it's really acute right in the moment, the cyclical sighing, and one of the reasons why it's so popular right now is it's short and sweet and right to the point. That's probably going to be one of the things that can shift you really quick. But then as soon as you shift out of that, moving that in, if you have the time and the inclination to do so, then moving 2 things as opposed
That's
to
okay.
using that as basically the breaker, slowing things down, but then the slow, steady breath is going to be a game changer. So if you can actually like just breathe less, it's going to be really most productive to reducing that stress in your system. Often when we're getting really worked up, we're tending to breathe a lot more quicker or irregularly. So breaking it with the cyclical sign for 3 sighs and then moving into a slower breath for ideally 8 to 10 minutes to have a nice positive effect from it, especially if you've been stressed for a while.
So when you say slow, steady breath after this, the sigh.
Yeah.
Are you saying basically that the equal in breath as the out breath? Like what we would say 4 or 5, whatever, in 4 or 5 out, so kind of that would be the equal.
The equal fluctuations of breath, yes.
Yeah.
Breathing in for, let's say, 5 or 6 seconds, or 4 if you're really worked up and can't extend your breath that long, to stabilize it. And then even shifting from there into more of that box style breathing where you actually go into some breath retention and you're holding for a few seconds after inhales and exhales so that you're stretching it out by breathing less and less. That could be hard to jump to right away if you're in a stress state. So doing the sighs first and then breathing the 4 in, 4 out is going to be kind of an in-between place. And then you could, and then box breathing if you keep downshifting one step at a time. So we ended up with 3. Complicated response.
So if the exhalation is the parasympathetic stimulator, which is the relaxation phase,
Yeah.
then why isn't prolonged exhalation relative to the inhalation a more physiologic way to create relaxation?
It is.
So then why don't we breathe 4 in, 6 out rather than 5 in and 5 out?
So again, it kind of comes back to your question earlier about steering the ship. If you're in a worked up state and you want to slow yourself down, the longer exhales are going to be better and the breath retentions. But if you're looking to basically hone your capacity to fluctuate with stress and actually be resilient in the face of it, then the equal fluctuations are bringing in essentially a bit of sympathetic charge and then releasing that charge. And you're riding more with like the wave of life, so to speak, rather than just slowing down. And you're training your system to make those appropriate fluctuations. And that particular rhythm that I mentioned earlier, 5.5 to 6 seconds, is tailored really specifically to the physiological relationship between your heart function and your lung function. So it's a resilience builder. It helps you manage stress. And it will slow you down and relax you to a degree, but if you're really needing to just slow down and relax and you want to lengthen the exhales, yeah, that makes sense.
I was wondering if you'd like to share any real life experiences where you know you've used your breath work, like in the moment.
Oh my goodness.
all
Not
the
to
time.
put you
on the spot. How about when you go get your groceries and it costs way more than you thought it would?
It's an interesting thing to respond to because I've done this long enough that I do it all the time.
Yeah.
In varying amounts throughout the day, but it's if I'm about to enter even before I came today, entering into this engagement, it's like it's stimulating still to step into a space where there's a bunch of new faces and a different structure than when I'm running my own events and things. And so it's just like slowing my breath down was part of what I did for a little while before I came here today, just to manage my own up energy that was in my system and to help level that out. Very recent example.
Yes, very recent.
But a great example for all of us, though, how we can go through life. That's great.
Yeah. And the nice thing with this, like, one, you've got your breath everywhere you go for as long as you're going, and you can be really preemptive with it. You can apply it going into a situation where you maybe are already feeling a little bit of that stress before you enter it, or even if you know that when you get there it could be provoking for that, you can prepare for it by working with your breath in constructive ways. Right? And you have it with you in the midst of the event too. And it also becomes a gauge as well, because for some of you, as you tune to it sensitively, you can start to notice your own fluctuations in your breath, and it gives you really quick feedback as to the state you're in. You can start to assess yourself that way.
What sort of breathing technique might I use if I really want to get wound up? If I really need to be, let's say I'm going to be doing a presentation and I've only just put this package together once and I need to be wired, how would I breathe for that?
I so rarely hear that side of it. So, you'd want to inhale more than you're exhaling. So you might do 4 seconds inhale and 2 seconds exhale. And that's going to basically charge your sympathetic system and get it going. So, for instance.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Have fun.
I'm kind of curious about, so we're doing that exercise where the breath is really quiet and listening for the sounds. There's this thing that sometimes gets, this wire gets crossed in my system around, it's easy for me to get quiet and still, but that's not a relaxed state. That's kind of a free state.
Right, right.
So the quiet still sometimes is really familiar, but it's not taking me to a place of more parasympathetic state.
Yeah. And that's the tricky part with meditation is sometimes it can be a way to go to a very comfortable place and hide it a little bit, right? Especially when there's certain types of trauma that are lingering in the system. And like you're saying, we can subdue ourselves and drop into a very quiet place and feel very distant to everything, but that's actually, there's a predilection to go there because it hasn't been safe to actually show up or be fully alive in our systems. So,
So is that just,
let me know.
that's just about observing
Yeah.
what is happening here?
Yeah, like, are you wondering like how to catch that you're doing that, or
Yeah.
what's your exact question?
Well, for me, it's like, oh, there I am again.
Right?
There's that, so, yeah.
Yeah.
It just feels familiar, but not relaxed, but it's not.
Exactly. And that's one of the key things when I'm working with folks is does it feel familiar? Because if it feels familiar, it could feel like even a particular age, a particular circumstance, and might get a little bit more attentive to some roots as to where that might be coming from, and then explore those roots. And we also might introduce other breathing techniques that would do kind of the opposite to see what happens in the system, and what types of things start to rise up. Yeah. I
Okay,
think-
well, thank you very much, Trevor.
Okay, you're welcome.
We usually ask our speakers to give 2 or 3 key takeaway points, and I think we kind of asked you that, but if you have anything you would want to emphasize as we finish this evening.
3 takeaway points. One, I think we heard some of this right at the end here. One would be that you've got arguably one of your most powerful tools for adjusting your own condition with you constantly in the way of your breath. So learning how to work with that constructively really supports you in modulating your experience of life and yourself. 2, breathing less on a regular basis is a good thing, which might sound counterintuitive, especially when people are constantly saying breathe deeply, as if that's going to be the helpful thing. That's not always the helpful thing, so breathing less. And the third thing is that there's actually different purposes for the breathing tools. So some of them are going to regulate your, and govern and manage your experience of life. And some of them are going to open you up into other orders of reality and who it is that's experiencing life. And more kind of the meditative and spiritual take on why you might be doing those practices. So just knowing that there are different purposes for the breathing practices, and that sometimes you might be applying a tool, thinking that you're shooting for one type of response, but like it's actually evoking something else, right? And that came up earlier in one of the shares, just in the sense of like expecting the tool to be maybe something that helps us stabilize as in our witness consciousness, but it's actually doing something different. And then it's not wrong, it's just a different function.
Okay, and also how can people connect with you to learn more or to have a therapeutic session with you?
My name, Trevor Yellich, is my website address, and yeah, I offer one-on-one breathwork sessions and other therapeutic types of sessions as well. We do breathwork journeys, or I lead them, but other people support me in them here in the city, evening events, and I do weekend immersions and retreats and trainings, training facilitators for breathwork, all kinds of stuff. So that's all up on my website. If you're interested, just type my name into a Google search and I should pop up pretty quickly.
Okay, well, thank you again, Trevor.